Webinar is titled The Overview of the New Regulations for Food Service and Bars. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions over the course of this webinar, please use the chat function for questions. I'm typing actually into the chat right now. You can reply, hit in that function, in that part of WebEx in order to submit your questions. I will do my best to answer as many questions as I can over the course of this 45-minute webinar. However, I may not get to every question. I may need to consult with some other departments for certain questions, or some questions might be very specific to your business that are better answered via email. If that is the case, if I don't get to your question, or if you have any other questions you'd like to ask, please email those questions to BACP Outreach. That's BACP Outreach, OUTREACH, at cityofchicago.org. I'm typing that email into the chat function right now, and you can also find it on the bottom of every page during this webinar. Again, send us an email there if you do not get your question answered, or if you have any other follow-up questions, and we'll make sure to track those down for you as soon as possible. Additionally, today's webinar will be recorded, and we will post it on our webinar website, hopefully by tomorrow. That website is chicago.gov/businesseducation, typing that into the chat now as well. So if you have any colleagues that are unable to attend today's webinar, or if you want to refresh yourself on anything that's in here, you can do that at find the recording at chicago.gov/businesseducation. Additionally, all of these guidelines are on our reopening website, which is chicago.gov/reopening. I just typed that into the chat as well. So all of the content that I am covering, you can find on that website as well. Do want to make sure, obviously I want to take this time to review them, but all of this content can be found there. Can point people to that website if they have any questions. So again, today's webinar is the overview of these new guidelines that are in place that were just announced on Monday by the mayor and by Health Commissioner Dr. Arwady. These are new guidelines for a number of different industries. Today, we're going to specifically talk about food service and bars. I want to make it clear these guidelines are a part of phase 4 still. We've said since the beginning of phase 4 back, I believe on June 26th, that we are going to be analyzing and looking at the data closely and making changes accordingly. So I'm going to start today's webinar by providing a brief update on the data and why it is that we are ready for these changes, that we are ready to expand our operations and loosen some of the restrictions on businesses. I want to preface all that by saying I am not the health expert. I am not from the health department. So these slides were provided by the health department, but if you have any very detailed questions or explanations of the data, be happy to connect you with someone at the health department who can help out with that. I'm then going to provide an overview of the changes to the phase 4 guidelines that are coming into effect tomorrow, October 1st. I'm going to provide an overview specifically of the food service and bar guidelines, the entirety of the guidelines, pointing out specifically the changes. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about enforcement and operational requirements. Finally, I do want to point to you guys again to chicago.gov/reopening. You can find everything you need to know about reopening, again, can be found on that site. So as promised, a little bit about the data before we move on to the specific new regulations, because I want to make it very, very clear everything comes from the data. Everything comes from what we are seeing in the numbers. So first, and probably the most common number you see is the case count. So back when we started phase 4, back in the end of June, we were dipped below 200 cases a day. Since then, however, we had been rising pretty steadily, up to nearly 400 cases a day on that 2-week rolling average. Now, over the last month or so, and here just you can highlight exactly where phase 4 has been, over the last month or so, we have seen cases go down, which is why we're ready for this loosening of restrictions. So I'm going to go through a couple of the different data points that the health department and the mayor have looked at in order to determine why we are ready for this. So first, cases have been stable or decreasing since August 24th. That is why, even though we're not below our 200 threshold, we set kind of an and or, either be stable and or decreasing for 28 days and or be sustained under 200. So we hit that first one. We've been stable or decreasing for over 28 days. Our most recent number is at about 299 new cases per day. Next data point we've been looking at as well is hospitalizations. As you can see, hospitalizations have also been going down, stable or decreasing since August 27th. Additionally, and this is critical, and we've had very good numbers now for a while, that our deaths have been consistently stable or declining since June, which is great news. We went from averaging in the 50s or so months ago to having about 3 deaths per day, which again is great news and great sign of progress in Chicago. Additionally, we look at, and the health department looks at emergency department visits for COVID-like illnesses. So not just for people who've been diagnosed, but for COVID-like illnesses. As you can see, this had been pretty consistent throughout phase 4 until around August 30th, when it began declining, and now has been stable or decreasing for, again, over 28 days, which is, again, why we are ready for this. Test positivity is a very important number that we are looking at. That has also been stable or decreasing for 14 to 28 days. It is now below 5%. That's kind of our target positivity. We obviously want to get that lower and lower and lower, but it has been below 5%. Hospital capacity during phase 4 has been adequate throughout. It's truly been sufficient, really dating back to the peak in April and May, which is a great sign, and a great sign that we would be able to withstand any sort of spike if, obviously hoping that is something that does not happen. Finally, testing capacity, and this has been great, really, dating back to May, June. We've been way over our goal of 4,500 tests per day. We had a little bit of a dip, you can see, during the week of Labor Day, but other than that, we have been very, very consistently, significantly over our goal, which is great news. I believe, I don't want to speak for the health department, but I believe we've done over 1 million tests since COVID since COVID became a part of our world, and we're really excited about our testing capacity. All of this is to say, and I think it's very important to leave this conversation with the data. The reason why we are able to take these steps that we will be taking tomorrow, October 1st, is because of the data, is because of all those data points I just told you. They're all in the green. We're where we want to be, which is why we're able to, as the mayor says, ease the dimmer switch a little bit. We're not fully reopening because we know how dangerous that is, but we can turn that dimmer switch just a little bit on our path towards fully reopening and take that next step on our path to recovery. So what I'm going to do now is provide an overview of the 5 new regulations that are coming into effect tomorrow at 5 o'clock a.m. Please note, again, coming into effect tomorrow at 5 o'clock a.m. These do not come into effect at midnight. If you are a bar or a restaurant or a tavern or brewery, please do not stay open till 1:30 tonight. Tomorrow night will be your first night in which you can do that. First, we're going to have increased indoor capacity starting tomorrow. That means any establishment that has been limited to 25% capacity can now expand to 40% capacity. Basically, anytime you saw 25%, you'll now have 40%, with a maximum of 50 people still in a room or a space. So again, capacity increased from 25% to 40%. This applies to a number of different businesses, not just restaurants, including non-essential retail, health and fitness centers, personal services, performance venues, event venues, movie theaters, museums, indoor recreation, indoor pools, higher ed classes, faith-based services. Any place that has been at 25 is now at 40. However, the maximum of 50 people in a room or space still applies. Second, we will be reopening taverns. So any establishment that serves alcohol without a food license may reopen beginning tomorrow for indoor seating at 25% capacity or 50 people, whichever is fewer. So again, that 50-person max is in place, but as you know, these establishments, taverns without a retail food license, have been closed under the last few months indoors, can now reopen indoors at 25% capacity. Third, we are extending hours for bars and restaurants. Any establishment that serves alcohol, sells alcohol for on-site or off-site consumption can now do so until 1 a.m. and may reopen and may stay open, remain open until 1:30. So again, these establishments had been closed, have been told to stop selling alcohol at 11 and close at midnight. Now they can stay open until 1 and won't have to close until 1:30. Right. See a couple kind of specific questions coming in. I'm going to cover all these regulations in more detail. Just want to start out with an overview here. Increased group size. Maximum group size doesn't necessarily apply to folks here, but maximum group size for health and fitness classes and after school programming will increase from 10 to 15 people. And again, not specifically applicable to folks on this call, but personal services that require the removal of face coverings can now be allowed. Now I'm going to provide, and again, I see a couple questions come in related to this. Reminder to please use the chat in order to ask your questions. I'm going to go over in detail the guidelines for food service and bars while highlighting the changes, all of the changes that are in effect tomorrow at 5 o'clock a.m. First, tables should be spaced 6 feet apart while decommissioning tables and or adding physical barriers if they can't be moved. So if you have booths, for example, that cannot be moved and are within 6 feet, you can add physical barriers between them. Otherwise, you should be spacing tables 6 feet apart. I want to reiterate the importance of having tables 6 feet apart. Just because we are expanding to 40% capacity does not mean you can ignore that tables must be 6 feet apart. If expanding to 40% capacity means that your tables can no longer be 6 feet apart, have to be closer than that, then that will not be allowed. This is something very important. Tables must be at least 6 feet apart. Any area where guests or employees queue should be marked with appropriate physical distancing guidance. So if you have a counter where people come up and order, if you have the checkout where people pay, make sure to be marking 6 feet of social distancing. Limit table capacity in gatherings to ensure social distancing. Table capacity is limited to no more than 6 people. That is not in red. That is not a change. So again, table capacity limited to no more than 6 people. And here's in red, here are your changes. Indoor service permitted at establishments that have a retail food license is limited to 50 individuals or 40% capacity for each room or space, whichever is fewer. Indoor service is permitted at an establishment without a retail food license, 50 individuals or 25% capacity for each room or space, whichever is smaller. I'm going to take a minute to answer a couple of questions that have come through related to this, and also to clarify a little bit about outdoor. It's not mentioned here explicitly, but outdoor service can continue, and there is not a capacity limit for outdoor service. If you are outdoors, then you may continue to operate in the exact same way that you have been operating. That means sidewalk cafes, outdoor patios, expanded outdoor dining areas into your parking lot, into the street. All of that can still continue. There is not a capacity limit. There's not a capacity limit for the outdoor locations. Included within that are tables that are situated within 8 feet of open windows, where the windows are open at least 50% of the wall. So that has been and will continue to count as outdoor space. So if you have an establishment that can open up an entire wall, for example, and you have tables right there, provided that you keep those walls open, that does not count towards your indoor capacity. That is a separate calculation. again, those tables need to be kept open. As it's getting, those walls, sorry, need to be kept open. If we get, obviously, when it starts getting colder and you're unable to keep those walls open, then it would count as indoor space. Great. You can see a couple questions come in related to capacity. So I'm going to pause and answer a couple of those questions. Can restaurants host events that have up to 50 people as long as tables are capped at 6 and spaced appropriately? Yes, there are specific guidelines for event venues, and I'm actually going to be doing a webinar today at 2:30 for event venues. But really, events should be following these same exact guidelines we're talking about right now. So you can have an event, but an event is not an excuse to have 50 people congregating in close vicinity of each other, all eating and drinking. You still must be seated at tables. Those tables must be 6 feet apart, and you can't have any more than 6 people in those tables. How should 6 feet between tables be measured? 6 feet should be measured really from the edge of the table. That's a great question. And then, obviously so again, the 6 feet is measured between tables. There's nothing new in those guidelines. The question about can people sit at bars, I'm going to get to that in just a second, but yes, people can sit at bars in maximum of groups of 6, and they must be 6 feet of social distancing away from any other group. See a couple questions come in specifically about how to make your calculation for indoor capacity. Please send those questions via email, and I can help out with that. Okay. And a couple questions again about multiple rooms and spaces and how to go about calculating that and what we mean by different rooms and spaces. So when we say no more than 50 people or 40% or 25% capacity for each room or space, depending if you are a restaurant or a tavern, we mean for it to be considered a different room or space, you then must, they must truly be different spaces. You can't really just kind of put up a curtain. They need to be entirely different spaces in which the people don't mingle. That's really important. If you have people mingling between rooms, then they're not different rooms. But if you have entirely separate tables, then they should be entirely separate rooms, and you can treat them as different rooms. Now, we understand that you may only have one occupancy placard for your entire establishment. It's up to you, the establishment, then to determine the capacity of each of the different spaces. If you have any specific questions about your capacity and how to calculate it based on square footage, please send us an email and we can help you out with that. We consult with our Department of Buildings on those questions. Okay. So I do see a couple different questions coming in, but I hopefully will cover some of those, and then I'll follow up with some of those as well. So ensure that protective gear is worn by all employees and customers. Face coverings must be worn over the nose and the mouth, and they can only be removed while customers are seated and eating. And I do want to reiterate the new change from the governor's order. Face coverings should also be put back on whenever the waitress or waiter or any server or anyone else is in the vicinity of the table. So you do need to put face coverings back on during those situations. Hand sanitizer, hand washing facilities should be readily available for customer and employee use. And you should be providing health and safety training related to COVID-19 for your employees. You should be implementing screening measures for your employees and customers. This means at minimum, employees should be self-screening to ensure that they do not have symptoms and should not be reporting to or allowed to remain at work if they are exhibiting symptoms or feeling ill. You can do more than that. You can do a temperature check. You can do something like that. But at minimum, you should be having the employees self-screen. We also say that you should be posting a pledge upon the entrance or conducting a screening to verify that customers, external suppliers, anyone coming into your establishment is not currently exhibiting COVID-19. Should be also establishing daily cleaning standards for spaces and high-touch items. In addition, a new change here, all places of business should be providing hand sanitizer for patrons and employees to use upon entry. Should be also posting visual guidance around your establishment for hygiene standards and entry requirements. Hopefully every place I've been to, I know folks already have that up, but please, again, visual guidance is something that we can and do look for. Finally, you should be modifying workplace conditions to minimize interactions. All patrons must be seated. Let me say that again. All patrons must be seated. Cannot emphasize that enough. This is something that is all too common that we're seeing. People cannot be eating or drinking while standing up. It's as simple as possible. If our investigators show up and we see guests standing and eating or drinking, that is not okay. They must remain seated. You can have, as I said, you can have your counter or bar seating open with social distancing. So you can have parties sitting at the bar, but they must be 6 feet apart. Here's a new change specifically for taverns that are opening inside. Establishments that do not have a retail food license, taverns and breweries, for example, patrons must remain seated whenever they are ordering. We're concerned as we're opening up taverns indoors that people will be congregating around the bar. And I know a lot of neighborhood taverns, typically you just go up to the bar in order to order your drinks. That is no longer okay. Again, you cannot go up to the bar if it's a place that does not serve food in order to order drinks. You need to have the drinks come to you at your table. Or again, you can be sitting at the bar if you are socially distanced away from other people. Cafeterias, buffets, self-serve food stations can be open, but the employee must be serving the food and wearing proper PPE. So self-serve buffets, things like that are not okay unless the employee is serving. Lastly, here, I do want to make it this clear. Establishments that don't have a retail food license need to make sure that food is available for purchase at all times that the establishment is open. Now, this is a new rule for taverns that are opening indoors. You must have some sort of ability for patrons to order food the entire time that the establishment is open. Now, this doesn't need to be something really formal. This just truly means that they must have the ability to order and eat food at your establishment while you are there. You can. What we recommend is, partnering with a local food establishment, having menus available, posting the websites of establishments that they can order food from, and then allowing delivery. You need to make sure that food is available. It does not need to be a formal partnership. You just need to make sure that food is available. So if you say, if our investigators can come in and say, where can people order food from? You need to be able to say, hey, this is where it is. This is how we've made them aware of it. That does not mean that everybody needs to be eating when they come in, but it does mean that it is an option. And if you tell us that, they can get something from the cafe down the street, but that place has been closed for 4 hours, then that would not suffice. So again, it needs to be available to patrons at all times that the establishment is open. All right, as you can see here, there's not a ton of new changes here. You should be limiting in-person work where possible. Obviously at restaurants and bars, it's hard to work from home. But any way you can, have online trainings or staggered staff meetings, things like that, we do recommend that. Drinking establishments that do not have a retail food license must limit seating to a maximum of 2 hours. That is not a change. That is something that has been in effect throughout phase 4, and I believe phase 3 as well. We still encourage cashless, contactless payment, menus that are scannable, things like that, curbside takeout, carryout, delivery. We encourage reservations to minimize waiting. It is the responsibility of the establishment to to manage their line outside of their venue. That has always been the case, even pre-COVID. So that is and was and is still the responsibility of you, the establishment, which is why we encourage reservations. So encourage patrons to remain outdoors while they're waiting. If applicable, you should be limiting staff travel across multiple restaurant locations. So if you have multiple locations, please limit that so people aren't traveling across those different locations. Finally, as you can see here at the end, there is one change here. Please follow all the health department and CDC guidance for testing and tracing protocols. We've been doing a really, really good job. Health department has an incredibly robust contact tracing program put together. But make sure that you are supporting that. If someone does contract COVID-19, first of all, let me take a step back. We're over 6 months into this. You should be prepared for that. It shouldn't come as a surprise, especially for these establishments that are reopening now. You should have a plan so you know what to do. And they must, any employees who has COVID-19 must quarantine. Anyone who's had close contact with them or with someone else with COVID-19 should also quarantine. If you are aware of 2 cases associated with your establishment over a 2-week period, we recommend that you should report those to the health department. Finally, and this is a new change effective tomorrow, when you're taking reservations or seating walk-in customers, restaurants and bars should retain an email and or phone number for possible contact tracing. Now, I know that this is something that many establishments are already doing just as part of their reservation system, but this is now going to be a formal requirement. And obviously, there's a couple details there. If someone is just getting getting carry out, or just, let's say you're a coffee shop, something like that, and just staying for a short period of time, then this is not a requirement. This is really for customers that are staying for an extended period of time or eating a meal. In any of those instances, in any of those cases, then you should be retaining the email or phone number. And so on here, just to confirm, let me I see a couple questions come in regarding, I want to take a last slide here to talk a little bit about alcohol sales, and then I will answer these questions. So for alcohol sales, there are 2 different types now that we're going to be talking about. First, I'm going to talk about restaurants or bars, establishments that have tavern or consumption on premises incidental activity license. So this is the license that most restaurants or bars throughout the city have, either a tavern or a consumption on premises incidental activity license. If this is the case, indoor liquor sales for on-site or off-site consumption must end at 1 a.m. Again, this is 2 hours later than what is currently in place. And a reminder, this comes into effect tomorrow at 5 a.m. So at 12:30 today, you're not able to operate. Establishments must close then at 1:30 a.m. So last call at 1, no more serving at 1, close at 1:30. Now, let me be very, very clear about one point, though. This only applies to indoor liquor sales. Outdoor liquor sales must continue to follow their existing rules. Whether you have a sidewalk cafe, an outdoor patio, an outdoor patio, or an expanded outdoor dining area, then you must follow the specific hours that are built into that specific permit. So, for example, and it really depends on the specific permit, but for example, if you have an expanded outdoor dining permit, most of them end service at 11 p.m. If you have an outdoor patio, most of them end at 11 p.m. If you're on Sunday through Thursday, and at midnight on Friday and Saturday. If you have a sidewalk cafe, most of them end at midnight. You must continue to follow those. That is not a green light in order to continue operating outside after that time. A reminder, this is for liquor sales for on-site or off-site consumption. So a bar or tavern or restaurant or brewery can sell alcohol to go until 1 a.m. You can also, that includes cocktails to go. However, they must be sold in a sealed and tamper-evident container. not in solo cups, not in cups with a straw, not in something with the top open so people can walk down the street drinking it. If you're selling cocktails to go, it must be sealed and tamper evident. If you have any questions about that, happy to provide you with an overview document if you reach out to us via email. Now, if you have a packaged goods license, which is for liquor stores, grocery stores, for example, alcohol sales must still cease at 9 p.m. Other licensed activity, however, may continue till the hours determined by your license or permit, and you cannot sell cocktails to go. Right. Again, I see a lot of questions come in. This is our last slide before we get into questions. I just want to reiterate a couple points. BACP has been and will continue to respond to complaints and proactively canvass entertainment districts. We can and will issue citations. We've conducted over 2,000 investigations and cited 142 businesses. So while we are very excited to get to this next point, now is not the time to let our foot off the gas. Now is not the time to reverse the progress that we've made, particularly over the last month, but really over the last 3 or 4 months. So we ask that you continue to be diligent, that you continue to ensure face coverings are worn, tables are 6 feet apart, minimize capacity. I want to make it very clear, our bars and restaurants have been doing a wonderful, wonderful job. And every time Commissioner Rosa Escareno or the mayor has been asked about it, we've been very clear. We've been very impressed about all the hard work that bars have been doing. But now is not the time to stop. Now, truly, now is the time to double down those efforts to make sure that we can do this next step responsibly and that we can further turn that dimmer switch. But I just do want to reiterate that before I open it up for questions. So now we got a little less than 10 minutes left. I know a lot of questions have come through, so I'm going to do my best to answer as much of them as I can. I do see a lot of questions regarding the topic of taking an email, phone number, and reservations. I do want to make it clear, this is not something that we do have the capacity or will be out there outwardly enforcing, but it is something that is a strong, strong recommendation, particularly for establishments that have people staying there for an extended period of time. If you're eating a meal, if you are sitting down for a number of drinks, for example, we do strongly, strongly encourage folks to be doing that and really should be doing that. Again, it's not something for we will be going out of our way and enforcing, but it is something that we do strongly, strongly encourage. Okay. I see a couple questions coming in specifically related to the why behind a lot of these guidelines. I do ask that you send those questions to BACP outreach at cityofchicago.org. And we will follow up. The health department obviously has been more involved in determining the why for all of these. So I would like to run some of those by the health department in order to get you definitive answers. I don't want to speak something that is incorrect. So I do ask if you have any sort of questions about the why for this, then we will be I will follow up for those via email. Great. Questions about outdoor cafe permits. Can you serve until 11 p.m. and guests can remain on the patio until midnight? Again, the specifics for outdoor cafes really depend on the specifics for your permit. So outdoor patios, sidewalk cafes, again, sidewalk cafes, expanded outdoor dining ones, and outdoor patios all have different rules specifically related to those permits. So if you have a specific question about your permit, please send us an email and we'll make sure to get you that answer. I had a question, what is an incidental license? Consumption on premises incidental license, incidental activity license, is the license that most retail food establishments, bars, other event venues might get. It shows that the alcohol serving is incidental to the main activity of the establishment. I had a question about how to calculate capacity. So I do want to Again, if you have an occupancy placard, that is what you should be using to calculate capacity. So if you have an occupancy placard, you will just take 40% of what your determined occupancy is in order to calculate capacity. However, if you do not have an occupancy placard, our general recommendation is to take your square footage and divide that by 37.5. Again, divide your square footage by 37.5 in order to calculate capacity. And that is because typically we say outside for restaurants and bars and most places like that, we typically, to be at 100% capacity, you would have 15 square feet per person. To be at 40% capacity, then you would have 37.5 square feet per person. So you take your floor area in square feet and you divide by 37.5. Got a question here. Do customers need to have masks on when conversing while at tables with no staff present? I want to reiterate, any time that the customers are not actively eating and drinking, they should have face coverings on. Anytime they're not eating or drinking, then they should be having their face coverings on. I had a question about if these slides are available to print. So you can find all of this information again at chicago.gov/reopening. If you go there, while these exact slides aren't there, the guidelines are actually more detailed and even more useful. You can find those again at chicago.gov/reopening. I had a question about 6 feet and how to measure it if you have accent chairs or sofa style seating. If you have anything like that, the important thing is that 6 feet is maintained between the areas in which people are seated. So you should be measuring 6 feet from those areas. I had a question if whether or not pool tables can be open at taverns. Yes, pool tables, darts, other things like that can be open. We have specific guidelines on our website for indoor recreation facilities, so I do recommend that you take a look at those. However, you cannot be drinking while playing pool or darts or any of those activities because, again, you must be seated while eating and drinking. So if you are eating or drinking, you must be seated, which means you cannot be playing pool while you are eating or drinking. Right. The question, does the capacity include employees? No, the capacity calculation does not include employees. Does the occupancy percentage apply to hotels and banquet spaces? So now hotels and banquet spaces, the 40% capacity is still does still apply to hotels and banquet spaces. Again, occupancy percentage does apply to hotel and banquet spaces, that 40% capacity. But however, you might have a different calculation of square footage. So if you send us an email, I can run that by the buildings department in order to get you a specific answer there. Okay. Question about contact tracing. Does it require the names and contacts of all individuals? No, we just need the name. We just need emails or phone numbers for a guest in the party. Just wanted to reiterate, incidental licenses, yes, can now sell cocktails to go until 1 a.m. And I do want to clarify again, guests must now keep their mask on at all times when seated, except when actively eating or drinking. And another question specifically related to packaged goods and how to go about getting an on-premise license. If that is something that you are interested in getting, please send us an email. And I'm happy to get you in touch with our licensing folks to help out. I had a question, can you create barriers or separations between parties to allow closer than 6 feet? To allow closer than 6 feet. So let me just move back to this original slide. Just to reiterate, tables should be spaced 6 feet apart. If the tables cannot be moved, then you can add physical barriers in between them. Great. As question is egress through rooms and spaces to go to bathrooms okay? That should be minimized as much as possible, but it depends really on the specifics of the setup, something that we are strongly discouraging though. I had a question about how to calculate 25% capacity. If you have an occupancy placard and want to calculate 25% capacity, you simply divide that number by 4. So if you have 100 typically, you divide it by 4, you now have 25. Great. I had a question, if people are not eating or drinking, is it permissible for them to gather and talk near a bar or in a room? That's something, again, that we are strongly discouraging. They should really, because it's very challenging, if you can do that and ensure that people are staying 6 feet apart and in groups of 6 or less, then it can be okay. But if they're not staying 6 feet or less away from each other, then it would not be permissible. So, and if they're doing any eating or drinking, it would not be permissible. But if you're able to maintain 6 feet of social distancing, then that would be okay. Again, if you cannot locate the occupancy sign, and aren't sure, please send us an email and we can help out and get some clarification there. Great, it is 1:45. I'll stay on for another minute in case anybody has any questions. But again, please send us an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. In case I did not get to your question, I know a lot came in. So please send an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org, and we'll be happy to get answers to your questions. I want to thank all of you so much for joining this. This is a sign that you're here and you care about following the rules. So I do really appreciate everybody for doing that. And to, just kind of remind all of you to please, please, please be diligent. Continue being diligent. We know this has been a very challenging summer. I am very excited about this announcement. I know many of you are very excited to expand operations, but we cannot use this as a green light to ignore all of the regulations we've been doing such a very good job following. So thank you all. See a couple questions come in. I'll follow up with you all individually, but thank you guys.